Welcome to our third episode of UnMasking COVID, a podcast that focuses on sharing personal stories during this uncertain time. Today, we have two special guests that are joining us from across the world to share how they have been impacted by this pandemic. So welcome, Sky and Kavinaya. Would you like to quickly introduce yourselves and where you are joining us from?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Kavinaya. I study in India. I live in India. So I just finished my first year of business administration. Yeah, that's about it.
Sky, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm studying in Western University for food and nutrition, but I'm from China, so I'm back to Shanghai for quarantine. And I'm glad to attend this podcast and introduce the situation from my country.
Yeah. Okay, great. So thank you so much for joining us. We are really excited to have you on our podcast. So I think first off, we can get you guys to share a little bit about the situation you are in right now. And just generally, if you know, how many cases are there in your country?
In India, I think it's around 30,000 positive cases at the moment.
I think for China now is already 80,000 or more cases, but now I think most of them are cured or back to their home. Yeah.
So a bit more about like, what's your situation like right now? Like what are your living situations like?
So, Sky, do you want to go first?
Okay. Actually, for now, Chinese people are basically back to their normal life and back to work, but people are still like keeping distance between each other, and the traveling management is still strict for preventing the suspected cases. And the government also set infrared thermometers in train stations and airports, to control the cases. But now, most of people are back to their normal life.
Yeah, that sounds great. So how about you, Kavanaya?
Yeah. So in India, on the 25th of March, they started a lockdown. So with like a quarantine, none of us could go out except for one person from each family to buy essentials. And that was initially in place for 21 days. But since the positive case count only increased, it was extended for an additional 2 weeks. And that ended on May 3rd. So since then, they've had some relaxations. So initially, only essential services were open, and you couldn't travel, using vehicles. And if you were caught using your vehicle, they were seized, and they were told that they were going to sell them in public auction in the future. So now you can travel, but if it's a motorcycle or a bike, only one person. If it's a car, one person the driver plus two people in the backseat. And non-essential services are also open, but only for certain timings. Yeah, that's the current situation.
I think in India, like you mentioned, like they were like seizing the vehicles and public auctions. Definitely does seem very strict, especially compared to China now, where most people have been like recovering and things are definitely becoming better.
Yeah, because the thing is, in India, I don't think a lot of people took it seriously. So even though the government spoke about the severity, the prime minister addressed the COVID-19, the entire situation, how we could reach the epidemic stage and the community spread, people really didn't take it into much consideration because you could still see people going about, crowding in shopping places and things. So they've been very strict.
I think another reason why is because in India there's a lot of homelessness. So when I went back a couple of years ago, there were a lot of families just on the streets, and they have like houses made out of like plastic or like stuff they got out of a garbage dump. And so I think this is the way it spreads a lot faster in India. And do you know if they have any measures to protect like the homeless?
So the people that you just mentioned, they're actually migrant workers. So they leave their towns from like they travel like 4,000, 5,000 miles all the way from the north of India and all to they come to the south for work. So they just live wherever, near the construction sites. And they were especially hardly hit by the pandemic and lockdown situation because now their livelihoods were destroyed. They didn't have money, and they couldn't travel because transport was stopped, interstate travel was banned. So lots of people, there was a lot of heartbreaking and heartwarming stories about people walking thousands of hundreds of miles to reach their homes. And after that, the government made it compulsory that if such migrant workers and all, they were living in places and they were paying rent, they should not be charged rent for the past 2 months, and this month also, I'm not sure. And now special trains which carry these migrant workers back to their hometowns, they're like secret trains, so nobody knows when it's going to happen. So they only intimate a certain number of migrant workers so that not everybody comes in crowds, and like 100 or 1,000 of these people are transported back home.
So just to confirm, so this is not something like the government is doing?
No, this is something the government is doing.
Oh, it is something the government is doing. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Makes sense.
I guess for Sky, what are some of the government what are some precautions that the government is taking to maintain social distancing? You told me that everything is somewhat back to normal, but people are still maintaining social distance. But how is the government ensuring that, or are there any
It's
precautions
actually
in
what
place?
the government is doing for. They still need to prevent the cases happen in community, because if the cases spread in a community, it will be like another increase. So they still have to make sure that social distance between people, and they like still restrict the amount of people coming in or out the community. Yeah, so it's although people get back to work, they still like keep it seriously. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. So like people generally seem to follow guidelines and maintain social distancing by themselves. Yeah, that's good.
And people actually students are gradually back to school. Yeah, and some of it still have online learning, but for some of it, others they come back to school, but they still wearing masks while having class.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like from what you've seen, so like China definitely started reopening things, and I know like in Canada there have also been talks about reopening stuff like non-essential businesses and having curbside delivery for retail store and things like that. And I know a lot of people are worried about what would happen when we reopen. Would we have like another wave and things like that? So how would you say reopening has gone in China?
What did you say? The reopening of non-essential business?
Yeah, and just like schools and everything in general.
Yeah, I heard from my parents. So my dad and my mom has already back to their original workspace, and they found that the mostly people are wearing masks to prevent it, but they still
So, so it's mainly like wearing masks and just maintaining like distance and things like that.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And Kavya, I'm just curious, but like in India, how prevalent are masks? Like, are masks mandatory for people to wear?
stores wearing a mask. But now, if you aren't wearing a mask, they basically ask you to go back home. So the government has made it mandatory, and it's also become a thing. Like if you go to a store and you're not wearing a mask, even the shopkeeper would ask you to leave. And you can see everyone wearing it, even if it's not like store-bought mask. People, just make their own masks or use a handkerchief or things like that. So even in stores, to ensure social distancing, they've drawn boxes using chalk. So people have to stand in that, to wait in line to ensure that, the 1 meter gap between people. So that's being followed pretty strictly right now. Also, although not in a couple of places, which is one of the reasons why there's a spike in Chennai, the place where I'm living. Do you want me to elaborate on that?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's this place called Coimbatore, which is like the central market where we receive all our fruits and vegetables from the neighboring towns and villages that produce them. And this is like the wholesale market from where the retailers get the produce and sell it to us, the consumers. And this place has no sense of social distancing or any of that. So through contact tracing, they found out that a large number of cases in the state that I live in can be traced back to this market. So because of this, they closed the market and they shifted it to a different place. And that place, the market is closed till tomorrow, and hopefully it opens. So because of that, there's a vegetable fruit shortage everywhere.
Yeah, with like the shortage, I'm assuming things would be expensive too. Like, do you know if the government is doing anything about ensuring that people do get the produce that they need?
The government is ensuring, so through the ration, there's the ration shops that's owned by the government, where they give rice, pulses, and essential durable non-perishables. And usually you can get it at a very cheap price, or sometimes just for free. And right now the government is giving large quantities of rice, different types of rice and pulses for free to the public, sugar. So they give you like a coupon, the time stamp printed on it. So at that time you're supposed to be there at the shop, you can collect it. But fresh produce is expensive. It's definitely all price, and the government hasn't done anything about that. But then again, as the supply falls and the demand is still there, the price is definitely going to be on an increase. At least for the short-term future, the prices aren't going to see any decrease.
Yeah, and I think we already kind of like covered this about like the government helping and like assistance they're bringing, like you mentioned the trains and like the free rice and things like that. But I think the question I had was specifically for students, because you are both students. Is the government doing anything specific?
So the board exams for the 12th graders, which the board exams had been postponed indefinitely. Now they're saying that they will take place at the end of July. And for the college students, we've been told that colleges will resume in August. If the situation doesn't get any better, then September. They've issued recommendations to schools and colleges, on when they should open and how they should function once they open. Like, for example, in schools, the central government has prescribed that when schools reopen, they should be working on a 50% basis, meaning on any given day, there should only be 50% of the students, and they should come to school on alternate days, and there should be social distancing maintained with spaces and all of that.
What about you, Sky? Do you know what's happening in China with regards to students?